I lost count of how many April seasons I wasted before I finally figured out what actually belongs in the ground this time of year. We are talking at least 5 or 6 springs where I would walk into the garden centre, grab whatever looked good on the rack, stick it in the soil, and then wonder why half of it bolted, half of it rotted, and the other half just sat there doing nothing. Yeah, that is more than two halves, and that is exactly how confused I was. It took me years of tracking my own results, writing down what worked, what flopped, and what absolutely crushed it before I landed on a list of vegetables that genuinely thrive when you get them going in April. And that is what I'm sharing with you today, the 10 best vegetables every home garden should be growing right now this month. Now, I have arranged these in a very specific order. The first few are going to be your workhorses, the reliable producers that I think everyone needs in their garden. But as we move through the list, we are going to get into some picks that are a little more surprising. And honestly, the last one on this list is the vegetable that completely changed my spring garden after years of me ignoring it. I am not exaggerating when I say it doubled my usable harvest in that shoulder season between spring and summer. And after we get through all 10, I have got a bonus technique for you. It is not a vegetable pick. It is a planting method I stumbled onto about 4 years ago that lets you squeeze roughly 30% more production out of any April bed. So stick around for that. Here is the thing I have learned after all these years of getting my hands dirty. April is not just another month on the calendar for gardeners, it is a transition point. Soil temperatures are climbing, day length is increasing fast, and there is this narrow window where cool season crops are still happy, but warm season crops can start getting established if you time it right. The gardeners who understand that April is a bridge month, not a waiting room, are the ones pulling food out of their beds weeks before everyone else. I used to think of April as too early for the good stuff and too late for the cold stuff. I was dead wrong, so here is what I have learned works, starting with something most people overlook entirely. The first vegetable I want to talk about is one I discovered almost by accident after I completely botched my spring greens one year: lettuce. And I know, lettuce sounds boring. But hear me out, because I'm not talking about tossing a few seeds in a row and hoping for the best. I am talking about a succession planting approach that gives you fresh salad greens from April all the way through June without a single bitter leaf. Here is what I do. Every 10 to 14 days, starting in early April, I sow a short row, about 3 feet long, of a heat-tolerant variety. My go-to picks are Muir and Coastal Star for romaine types, and Jericho if you really want to push into warm weather. I plant seeds about a 1/4 inch deep, thin them to 6 inches apart once they get their first true leaves, and I keep them under 30% shade cloth once daytime temps start hitting 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The key is that by staggering your plantings, you're always harvesting young, tender lettuce before it ever has a chance to bolt. Before I figured this out, I would plant one big batch, get overwhelmed with lettuce for 2 weeks, and then watch the whole thing turn bitter and go to seed. 3 wasted seasons before I got smart about it. Now, that idea of succession planting pairs perfectly with the next vegetable because this one actually benefits from going in the ground right alongside your lettuce: radishes. And specifically, I want you thinking about a variety called Cherry Belle or French breakfast. These are ready to pull in as little as 22 to 28 days from seed. That is not a typo, less than a month. What I do is interplant radish seeds between my lettuce rows, spacing them about 2 inches apart and 1/2 inch deep. The radishes germinate fast, break up the top crust of the soil for the slower lettuce seedlings, and you harvest the radishes before the lettuce ever needs that space. It is like getting 2 crops from the same square footage with zero extra work. The soil science behind it is simple. Radish taproots create tiny channels in compacted spring soil, improving aeration and water infiltration for neighboring plants. I read a study out of Oregon State Extension years ago that confirmed what I was seeing in my own beds. When I started interplanting radishes with my greens, my lettuce root development improved noticeably. You could actually see the difference when you pulled plants out at the end of the season. Here is one that I want to be straight with you about because I messed this up for more years than I care to admit. Peas, sugar snap peas specifically, and my favorite varieties are Sugar Ann for a bush type and Super Sugar Snap for a climbing type. Now, the mistake I made, and I bet a lot of you are making it too, is waiting until April to direct sow peas. In most zones, 6 through 8, your peas should ideally go in the ground in late February or March. But here is the thing. If you are in zone 4 or 5, or if you had a late cold snap and missed that window, early April is actually your prime pea planting time. The trick I learned is to inoculate your seeds with rhizobium bacteria before planting. You can buy a little packet of pea and bean inoculant for a couple of dollars, dampen your seeds, shake them in the powder, and plant immediately. This helps the peas fix their own nitrogen from the atmosphere, which means better plant health, and you're actually improving your soil for whatever you plant in that spot next. I plant my climbing varieties along a simple cattle panel trellis, 6 feet tall, with seeds spaced 2 inches apart and about 1 inch deep. One more thing, and this tripped me up for years. Peas want cool roots. A 2-inch layer of straw mulch right after planting keeps soil temperatures down and moisture consistent, which directly translates to a longer, more productive harvest window. All right, before we keep going, I want to mention something quickly. If you're watching this and thinking you want a complete system for getting more food out of your garden, not just individual tips, but the whole picture from soil prep to harvest timing, I put together something called the 30-Day Maximum Yield Protocol. It is a 115-page guide that covers soil biology, strategic pruning for higher yields, companion planting systems and succession planting schedules, basically everything I wish I had in one place when I was figuring all this out the hard way. It is $17, and honestly, it is the resource that transformed how I approach my garden. If you want to check it out, scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description below. All right, let us keep going because we have still got some real game changers coming up. This next vegetable took me a while to appreciate, and I think a lot of gardeners sleep on it because it is not flashy. Spinach, specifically Bloomsdale long-standing spinach, which is an old variety that handles the transition from cool to warm weather better than most. I direct sow spinach seeds 1/2 inch deep and 2 inches apart in rows that are about 8 inches apart. The key timing detail for April planting is this. Spinach germinates best when soil temperature is between 45 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Any warmer and germination gets spotty and slow. So in April, I'm getting my spinach in the ground early in the month while that soil is still on the cool side. What surprised me when I started tracking my harvests is how much more productive spinach is when you harvest it as cut and come again rather than pulling whole plants. I take the outer leaves when they are about 4 to 5 inches long, and the plant just keeps pushing new growth from the center. One planting gave me 6 solid weeks of harvest before it finally bolted in late May. Now, the next one might raise some eyebrows because a lot of people think it is strictly a summer vegetable, but stay with me. I am talking about bush beans, and specifically the variety Provider. Here is what I found after testing this over multiple seasons. If your soil temperature is at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and in most zones that happens by mid-April, bush beans will germinate and grow just fine. I plant Provider bean seeds 1 inch deep, 4 inches apart, in rows 12 inches apart. They are up in 7 to 10 days and producing pods in about 50 days. What makes Provider special for April planting is that it was bred with cold tolerance in mind. I have had seeds germinate in soil as cool as 55 degrees, though 60 is the sweet spot. The first year I tried April beans, I used a different variety, Blue Lake, and germination was terrible because the soil was still too cold. That one failed experiment sent me digging through seed catalogs and extension publications until I found Provider, and it has been my early season bean ever since. This one seems almost too simple to work, but the results convince me. Green onions, or more precisely, bunching onions, like the variety Evergreen Hardy White. Here is what I love about these for April. You can direct sow seeds 1/4 inch deep and barely 1 inch apart, or you can plant sets or even just root ends from store-bought green onions about 2 inches deep. They tolerate frost, they tolerate heat, and they are ready to harvest in as little as 60 days from seed or about 3 weeks from sets. I plant them as border rows along the edges of my raised beds where they would otherwise be wasted space. A 4-foot row gives me more green onions than my family can use, and I just keep cutting them at soil level and they regrow. This was one of those vegetables I ignored for years because it did not seem exciting enough. And then I realized I was spending money at the grocery store every week buying something I could grow for essentially free in the margins of my existing garden. Speaking of making better use of space, the next vegetable is one that a lot of gardeners put off until May or even June. And I think that is a mistake. Beets, specifically Detroit Dark Red for reliability, or Kyoja if you want something a little more interesting on the plate. Beet seeds are actually clusters of multiple seeds, so even if you sow them 1 inch apart, you will need to thin the seedlings. I plant about half an inch deep in rows 8 inches apart, and I thin to 3 inches between plants once they're about 2 inches tall. The thinnings go straight into salads. Here is the timing reason April works so well for beets. They germinate in soil as cool as 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and they actually develop better flavor when they mature during cool to mild conditions. A beet that matures in July heat tends to be woody and bland. A beet that goes in the ground in April and gets pulled in June is sweet, tender, and has that earthy richness that makes you wonder why you ever bought them from a store. Now I want to share one that took me 3 full seasons to get right. And honestly, I almost gave up on it entirely. Carrots. If you have tried to direct sour carrots and gotten poor germination, patchy rows, and forked, stubby roots, welcome to the club. I was president of that club for a long time. The breakthrough for me was twofold. First, I switched to a pelleted seed, which is just a raw carrot seed coated in a clay shell that makes it bigger and easier to handle. Danvers Half Long is my April variety of choice, especially if your soil is on the heavier side. I sow pelleted seeds 1/4 inch deep, spacing them about 1 inch apart in rows 6 inches apart. Second, and this is the part that actually fixed my germination problem, I cover the seeded row with a strip of burlap or a thin piece of cardboard for the first 7 to 10 days. Carrot seeds need consistent moisture to germinate, and that surface crust that forms after a spring rain will stop them cold. The cover keeps moisture locked in. I just check underneath every couple of days and remove it as soon as I see green. After I started doing this, my germination went from maybe 40% to consistently over 85%. That single change saved me from giving up on carrots entirely. But you do need patience. Carrots take 70 to 80 days to reach full size, so an early April sowing means you are pulling them in mid to late June, which is perfect timing. This next pick is one I want to be honest about. I used to think it was a waste of garden space because it takes up room and does not produce a ton of weight per square foot. But after researching the nutritional density, I changed my mind completely. Kale. Specifically, lacinato kale, sometimes called dinosaur kale or Tuscan kale. One study I came across from the USDA nutrient database showed that a single cup of raw kale has more vitamin C than an orange and more calcium per calorie than milk. When I looked at it that way, as nutrition per square foot rather than weight per square foot, kale jumped to the top of my list. I plant transplants 12 to 18 inches apart in April, and just like spinach, I harvest the lower leaves once they are about 8 to 10 inches long and let the plant keep growing from the top. A single kale plant can produce for 6 to 8 months if you do not let it flower. In my Zone 7 garden, I have had lacinato kale survive light frosts in fall and keep producing well into December. That is an incredibly long return on a single planting. All right, this last one. This is the one I told you about at the beginning, and it honestly changed how I approach my entire spring garden after years of just completely ignoring it. Swiss chard, specifically the variety Ford Hook Giant, or Bright Lights if you want the colourful stems. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Swiss chard is just a leafy green. Why is this the big payoff? Here is why. For years, I was planting spinach for my spring greens and then watching it bolt by late May. Then I would plant a second round of greens for summer, and there was always this gap, this 3 to 4 week window where I had nothing leafy coming out of the garden. The year I started planting Swiss chard in early April alongside my spinach, that gap disappeared entirely. Swiss chard handles the cool spring temperatures just fine. Seeds germinate in soil as low as 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but unlike spinach, it does not bolt when the heat comes. It just keeps growing right through summer, into fall, and even handles light frost in late season. I plant seeds about half an inch deep, 6 inches apart, in rows 12 inches apart. Once plants are established, I side dress with a half inch of compost around each plant about every 6 weeks. A single bed of Swiss chard, 4 feet by 8 feet, has given me continuous leafy green harvests from late April all the way into November. That is roughly 7 months of production from one planting. When I finally tracked those numbers in my garden journal, I felt genuinely foolish for all the years I had skipped over chard in the seed catalogues. It is the single most productive spring-planted leafy green for home gardeners, and I will stand by that based on what I have seen in my own garden. Now, let me touch on a few common mistakes I see gardeners make with April planting, and I made every single one of these myself. The first is planting warm season crops too early. A lot of us get excited and put tomatoes and peppers in the ground in April when the soil is still in the 50s. Those plants just sit there, stressed and stunted, until conditions warm up. A better approach is to focus April energy on the cool-tolerant vegetables we just covered, and save your tomatoes and peppers for May when soil temps are consistently above 65 degrees. Second, a lot of gardeners skip soil temperature checks entirely and go by air temperature alone. Air might be 70 degrees, but your soil at 4 inches deep could still be 52. A simple soil thermometer, they cost about $8, completely eliminates the guesswork. Third, I see people plant everything at once in early April instead of staggering their sowings. The result is a massive harvest all at the same time, then nothing. Succession planting, which I talked about with lettuce, applies to almost everything on this list. Stagger your plantings by 10 to 14 days, and you will extend your harvest window dramatically. Now, here is that bonus I promised you. This is not a vegetable pick, but a planting method that I stumbled onto about 4 years ago, and it has made a real difference. I call it the pre-warm technique. About 2 weeks before I plan to sow seeds in a bed, I lay a sheet of clear plastic directly on the soil surface and weigh down the edges with bricks. The clear plastic creates a greenhouse effect, trapping solar heat and raising soil temperature by 8 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit in just 10 to 14 days. I have measured this with a soil thermometer at 4 inches deep. What this means practically is that you can start planting cold-sensitive crops like bush beans a full 2 weeks earlier than your neighbours. You just pull the plastic the day before you sow, and the soil retains that extra warmth for several days. This one technique shifted my entire April planting schedule forward and gave me a meaningful head start on the season. If these tips were helpful, I want to remind you about the 30-day maximum yield protocol. Everything we talked about today, the succession, planting, the soil temperature strategies, the variety selection, it is all part of a bigger system, and that system is laid out step by step in this 115-page guide. It covers soil preparation and biology, pruning techniques that genuinely increase yields, companion planting combinations that actually work, and a complete succession planting schedule so you never have a gap in your harvests. It is $17, and it is honestly the guide I wish I had when I started gardening, instead of learning everything through years of trial and error. Scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description below to grab a copy. April's the month where smart planting decisions pay off for the entire season. Get these 10 vegetables in the ground now. Use the methods we covered today, and you are going to be pulling fresh food out of your garden while everyone else is still waiting for summer. I would love to hear which one of these you're planting first, so drop that in the comments. Happy gardening, and I will see you in the next video.